Did you know that there are gates to Did you know that there are gates to every city and that sometimes cities are actually gates to nations? This is what I saw spiritually at the gates of the city on the New York City bridges. During my 7 week I accidentally moved to New York adventure, I was blasted straight into a very different type of adventure that I didn't know I was about to have. I had no doubt that I would be having a few adventures when I felt God pull me aside late one night in Paris. In my tiny 18 square meter apartment, I felt safe and cozy, wrapped and held. But in prayer one night, I made a list of 13 places where I was going to visit, pray, see, and write. When I got to New York in the first 2 weeks, I visited each one, asked God to show me what he saw, and wrote it down. The fancy name for this is called spiritual mapping. It's going in prayer and asking God to show you the spiritual reality of a city so that you can better partner with and understand what God is doing. Not so that you can superimpose your own story or become the hero of the story, but so that you can show up and join God in what God is doing. But when 2 weeks became 7 weeks, I realized that there was about to be a whole lot more to the story because I was about to be in the story. God often wants to show us what he wants to do, not just call us to war or pray or call down, because sometimes looking, praying, and seeing are more than enough. There's that verse, do I not do anything without telling my servants, the prophets? There's that other verse, the eyes of the Lord are everywhere. In this day and age, we're all called to be servants, prophetic people, and eyes. But that's another story for another time. Learning to see what God is seeing and do what God is asking you to do is a whole lot of a lifelong journey. And as humans, we're invited to be a part of the story. That's because God doesn't do things alone. God is about family. And as I watched through Dumbo for the first time in a long time, a few weeks ago, I looked up towards the Brooklyn Bridge and saw it covered in a huge, fat, prickly porcupine. Its shape covered the bridge, literally creating a blockage over the Brooklyn Bridge. Lazily, it looked out over the tourists who were snapping pictures madly, unaware of what else was really in the frame. Holy Spirit is what I said. And as I sat there and watched and listened, I heard there are things opening up and guardians at the gates. Watch and see. And over the next month, when I was forced to stay in New York, I would certainly do just that. But I didn't know exactly what to do in that moment. So I walked a little bit further down to the Manhattan Bridge, which was choked by a huge black snake wrapping around the wires of the bridge with its tentacles, choking it. I just looked and said, Holy Spirit, can you help? And a verse came to mind. Now, at the end of the Manhattan Bridge, there's actually a series of archways that form a gate into the city. This is deeply historically, culturally significant on a profound level. And as I looked at that gate, there was a verse that came to mind, and it said, the gates of hell will not prevail. And then there was a phrase that followed that said, will not prevail against the gates of New York. Over my next several weeks in the city, I learned that these bridges are indeed called the gates of New York City. This is the place where everyone, from commuters in Brooklyn to immigrants who come from Ellis Island to settlers who met with indigenous Americans on the shores of what is now called Pearl Street, everyone has taken these steps into the city passes through these gates. On July 4th, nearly 5 weeks into my trip, I watched the fireworks far up on the left side of Manhattan. I knew that there had been a shift. When I walked out of my apartment that night to go see the fireworks, I knew, and without going to look, I knew the snake and that porcupine were done for. What I didn't know, because I was nowhere near those bridges, Brooklyn Bridge actually caught fire that night. From the fireworks, Brooklyn Bridge caught fire. You see, miles away, I had felt that there was a profound shift in the atmosphere, but I certainly didn't know how profound it was indeed. But the next week would prove far more telling. I knew that there had been a shift, so I went in faith to see. Beginning my walk on the Manhattan side of Manhattan Bridge, I looked at the gates of the city and I heard Jesus say, look at the gate. So that rounded piece of architecture that showed up, there was a huge tear, like it's as though there had been a black goo covering that part of the gate. And suddenly I looked and there was a rip through it.
So I have a bit of a clutter.
There has a there had been a battle that had been fought and won. And as I stood and looked at that, the remnants of the battle, I heard invite the angels to come through. Taking a breath, I began to pray, and this verse tumbled into my lips. Open up, you ancient gates, that the King of Glory may come in. And as I walked down the length of Manhattan Bridge, angels with no swords, but gentle angels sent to minister began to sweep and pour into the city. As I walked the full length of Manhattan Bridge, there was no black snake. Rather, there was the residue of a battle that had been fought and won. As I began to wend down towards Brooklyn Bridge, I saw an incredible sight. Where Old Porcupine had been, there was a firefight that was continuing, but something else was resting in its place already, a dove. And I just looked and I said, Holy Spirit, is that really you? And it seems that that is indeed what I was seeing. And then I heard resonantly in my spirit, go and walk the bridge. It's really important that you go walk the bridge tonight. And so as I traced Brooklyn Bridge towards Manhattan, I was just celebrating and I was so happy, and it felt like there had been a real shift. But as I walked the Brooklyn Bridge, I hit a massive crowd of people. It was like just a complete logjam. I thought I had walked at first into a group of tourists who were trying to take their phones out to take videos or pictures or whatever. What I walked into was a scene where people were taking their phones to try to see what was up ahead. And no one seemed to be going anywhere, and I slipped down the side of the crowd, squeezing, and I saw police officers blocking the barricade. And I just was like, is this the peace of the Holy Spirit? Like, I am so confused. And I was also confused because hadn't I just seen like there was a victory that was here? And I just said, hey, what's going on? And a woman next to me pointed and she said, someone has climbed up on the bridge and they think that they're about to jump. And there was a team of police officers that were tracing the top of the bridge. It was a special climbing tactical team and begging. They were trying to talk someone down off the bridge. And there were ambulance lights down below spinning. All of these things were happening. And as I watched, I heard this phrase, pray that the blood sacrifices stop in this city. That thought cut across my mind. And of course, I know that occult practices like this happen in New York City. If you don't know, don't bother looking it up. But as I looked up, I realized what was actually happening in the spiritual realm. And I started to pray for peace. And an hour later, the woman was brought down slowly, safely, and carefully. And as I stood in the jollier in my adventure, the gates of hell will not prevail against New York's gates. God is rewriting the narrative and the story of what has happened here and what has been allowed to happen here. New York's gates are the gates of America. We can trace the paths of immigrants and indigenous tribes alike through the entrance of the Hudson. God is removing and breaking every dark thing that has attempted to intertwine itself in New York's DNA, because something else is about to come in and certain other things are about to